The 2009 Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction focuses on the nexus between disaster risk and poverty in the context of global climate change. The study shows that both mortality and economic loss are heavily concentrated in developing countries and disproportionately affect those in poverty. The report shows how climate change will magnify the uneven social and territorial distribution of risk, further amplifying poverty, and calls for an urgent paradigm shift in disaster risk reduction. The current progress in implementing the Hyogo framework needs improvement to address the underlying drivers of risk and the translation of disaster impacts into poverty outcomes. It notes that efforts to reduce disaster risk, reduce poverty, and adapt to climate change are poorly coordinated. Key challenge identified by the report is to link and focus the policy and governance frameworks for DRR, poverty reduction, climate change adaptation, and public participation in a way that can bring these local and sectoral approaches into the mainstream. Now, what were some of the practical lessons, I guess, based on the Philippine experience, which can provide a rationale for the integration of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation? For capacity-constrained national entities, giving priority to mainstreaming and integrating DRR and CCA processes can help ease the burden of programming development assistance. This requires that finance and planning ministries be committed to ensuring policy coherence in national planning through budget processes and aid coordination. Other practical reasons for the integration of DRR and CCA include easing the burden of programming development assistance, minimizing the duplication of efforts and redundancies, reducing potential conflicts in policy development, making efficient use of scarce resources, and the increasing recognition, especially at the community level, that there is little practical difference between the two. Now, what are some of the barriers to the integration of DRR and CCA? Asian countries face significant capacity constraints. These relate to the weak coordination between levels of government, poor communication between governments and local communities, political will, funding gaps, and low levels of expertise and know-how. Number two, there's a difficulty in quantifying the benefits of DRR and CCA. To promote DRR and CCA, the case needs to be made in economic terms. Despite the fact that prevention is more cost-effective, disaster response and recovery wins sympathy and immediate response nationally and from across the world. Political interest in natural hazards is at its highest during and shortly after a disaster, when it's too late. Although a commitment to build back better can help salvage some of the lost opportunities, funding for prevention measures and preparedness is hard to come by when there has not been a devastating cyclone or prolonged drought. Quantifying the benefits of a particular initiative to reduce climate and disaster-related risks is very challenging. For example, it is difficult to measure in economic terms the human suffering avoided by the allocation of an additional 10% to a budget to make a school more disaster resilient or climate proof. Now, what are some of the approaches to address these barriers and to facilitate integration? Improved access to practical weather and climate change information. Effective communication between different development actors is a prerequisite to the coordination of DRR and CCA initiatives and interventions. One impediment to this is the way in which weather and climate information is packaged, delivered, and presented. Often, it is not immediately usable in everyday decision-making that shapes the lives, livelihoods, and responses of the general public. Packaging and communicating information in the local context and vernacular is a vital precondition for a more successful integration of DRR and CCA. We need a stronger enabling environment and enhanced communication to practitioners in other fields and to the broader public. The enabling environment plays a critical role in achieving more integrated implementation of CCA and DRR. At the national level, it is government's responsibility to ensure a strong enabling environment which is of critical importance, in particular to communities, as this is where most CCA and DRR activities are focused. Communities will see more value in pursuing an integrated approach if it is already reflected in national and sectoral development policies and plans. For the integration of DRR and CCA, it is preferable to have a single government agency responsible for both. It is also best located within an influential ministry or department that is adequately supported financially and in other ways. Governments and their development partners play an important role in ensuring that communities are equipped with the requisite knowledge, skills, and technologies. Government officials need to develop a supportive and productive rapport with communities, with community leaders, in order to achieve a timely and efficient flow of information and assistance. Ensuring a strong enabling environment is an effective way of addressing many of the above-mentioned barriers to integration. It is particularly relevant to capacity constraints and overcoming the global and regional policy vacuum. Information support for decision-making, I guess another key point that has to be made. The critical aspect of effective decision-making is access to relevant hazard information. Thus, national meteorological and hydrological services have an important role to play in providing access to reliable and long-term natural resource data. Also, rigorous economic studies and advice is needed to advocate for prevention and adaptation measures at national or subnational levels where budgets are actually set. Governments need to ensure that relevant scientific institutions are well funded and that hazards remain on the agenda at all times. Finance ministries need to be shown that the costs of DRR and CCA, while appearing large, are actually much lower than the damages that will be suffered without adaptation. Now, as a final point, I guess, we need more emphasis on bottom-up approaches. In addition to strengthening the enabling environment, there needs to be greater emphasis on bottom-up initiatives such as ecosystem-based adaptation projects. Such community-based initiatives have demonstrated considerable success in the Philippines. This highlighted that people-centered strategies are more cost-effective for reducing weather and climate-related risks and can be more equitable than large-scale structural measures. People-centered strategies are more likely to provide a robust defense against a number of stresses, not just those related to extreme events. This is actually part of the framework that is presently being implemented. Calbayog City was part of, I think around 60 cities that participated in the city's development strategies. That's a partnership between the Cities Alliance, the World Bank, and the League of Cities of the Philippines. And part of this initiative is to develop, is to enhance the capacities of LGUs to do visioning, to do strategic planning, and to be able to prioritize projects. And as was reiterated during our last, we had a session just last week, the most important contribution of the CDS was the development of the capacities of cities to really plan and prioritize. And since DRR and CCA is part now of really the development framework of any local government unit, even those that are particularly focused on local economic development, then this is definitely one tool that we can use for furthering that agenda. Just some priority areas: guidance to national and local government on strengthening the enabling environment to support greater integration, to really make the case that DRR and CCA is an economic concern, to strengthen inclusive approaches in DRM or DRR and CCA, and for concerned agencies to really prepare and disseminate best practices on this issue. And lastly, for the development of a self-assessment tool that will allow government entities to well, to assess their present status with regard to DRR and CCA. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Nishi. So before I proceed, we're just going to ask our speakers to limit their presentation to 15 minutes so we can have more time for question and answer, which we're going to do after all the presentations. So I'll be picking questions, 3 questions from the floor later, 3 questions later. So I think we started on the right track. I think the presentation focused on really a very controversial topic, which is about climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. Are they similar or different? I think this was a big debate then, because I was also asked once why there should be an integration between the two, because they have 2 frameworks, legal frameworks. One is then 121, and the other is, if I'm correct, 9729. So really, this is a good step towards really knowing the science between climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. And this has been started to be integrated since the Incheon resolution in South Korea. But there are some weak barriers to the integration of CCA and DRR, aside from the legal frameworks, which are 2 different, and then the monies that are provided to them. Sino ba mas maraming pera? CCA or DRR? Okay, so there is also weak coordination, and then poor communication, low political will, and technical expertise. And this sets the right, I think, as the segue. One of the barriers is funding gaps. This is being trying to be filled up through a law, the People's Survival Fund. And we are lucky to have today somebody who is an expert, who has done a research on adaptation funds. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Kalayaan Pulido Constantine.
So, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat po sa NCPAG sa invitasyon na ibinigay po sa amin sa Oxfam. Ang aking ipapamahagi po ngayon ay maliban po sa PSF, paano po ba ang itsura ng finance para sa usapin ng adaptation sa Pilipinas. What we did as Oxfam as an organization was actually just to commission 2 researches to find out what is the level of financing for adaptation and what specific recommendations we can actually take forward to scale up and address the resource gaps, particularly for local government units who are in the front line of adapting to the impacts of climate change. For this presentation, I will focus on 2 issues that we are advocating for. One is on the People's Survival Fund, and the other is really just an initial study on the relevance of weather index-based insurance for rural livelihoods. One of the key calls of the Philippines, together with other southern countries in climate negotiations at the international level, is the importance of the delivery of climate finance to support the adaptation and mitigation needs of developing countries. Climate finance that is predictable, that means it's provided in a constant, predictable stream. Climate finance is additional, which means it's on top of existing aid already provided by developed countries. And third, climate finance that is accessible, something that will really reach those who are most vulnerable communities on the ground.